Hello and welcome to On the Marie Curie Couch, the podcast that aims to break down taboos and start open, honest conversations about death and dying. I'm Jason Davidson. I'm a social worker by profession, and I've worked in palliative care, hospice care, and bereavement support services for more than a decade. Each episode, we'll be speaking to a well-known guest to find out about how they feel about their own mortality and how their personal experience of bereavement has shaped the way they live their life. Today, I'm on the Marie Curie couch with Tara Fitzgerald. Tara's a British actress who's appeared in feature films, television shows, on radio, and on the stage. Her film credits include Sirens and The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill but Came Down a Mountain, both with Hugh Grant, as well as Brassed Off. Since 2007, Tara's also appeared in more than 30 episodes of the BBC TV series Waking the Dead and played the role of Selyse Baratheon in the hugely popular HBO series Game of Thrones. Tara Fitzgerald, welcome to the Marie Curie couch.
Thanks, Jason.
How are you?
I'm well. I'm doing well.
I'd like to start today, Tara, by asking if you could tell me about a significant bereavement that you've experienced in your life.
Yeah, sure. Well, I lost my father when I was 11. So this is going quite a way back now. And that was, I mean, death is always significant, isn't it? And in fact, your relationship with death, or one's relationship with death, changes so much over the years, it seems to me. And it also has been my experience that when I've lost people more recently, it's almost reactivated sometimes the first experience of death, or it certainly, it doesn't catalogue it, but it brings it up again, or it can do. In some ways, in positive ways, you know, there are very positive things and about losing people, and I know that can relate to the legacy. But I think the thing that was so difficult for me to process at 11 was that it seemed to happen, you know, too soon. You know, I suppose it wasn't something that as an 11-year-old I was prepared for in any way, partly because of the times we were in, partly because it doesn't happen very often, partly because I don't think, I think it's very complicated preparing children for death. I think it's a very sensitive, can be a very sensitive subject. So I think what tends to happen is that one does it in reaction. You know, as an older person, you might only respond to a child's loss once it happens, if that makes sense. But I didn't. It happened out of the blue. It's a sort of complex story because I didn't live with him. He was no longer with my mother, but I saw him on holidays and, you know, the weekends when he could. And he had remarried. He was with my stepmother, so she relayed the information about his death to us, to my mother, and my mother passed it on to me and my sister. And we were initially told by her that he'd been killed in a car crash. And that's what I believed for many years. And I understand now why we were told that. But what transpired was that at the age of 19, we learned that he actually had committed suicide.
Right.
So, yeah, for all sorts of reasons, very, very solid reasons, my stepmother had decided that she couldn't tell us the truth about his death. What that meant was that in one way, I had to reprocess the death 8 years later. And that was very strange again. You know, suicide is still quite taboo, I think, you know, and it's a very rich subject you know, it's a very sensitive subject. And I know is something that has come up, or it seems to me has come up a lot more in public awareness over the last few years. But when I was 11, I think I didn't really have a hold on it at all. But then I didn't know that was how he died. So anyway, I hope that's making sense.
It does, absolutely.
Yeah. Also, when I found out he had died, my first response was to sort of, I remember telling my best friend, and I sort of laughed. I was so uncomfortable with the news. I laughed, and she said, I remember she said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know. I was so baffled by it, I suppose." But then over the next sort of that day, my teacher, they were told at school, and my teacher took me to one side. She was a brilliant woman. I don't know if she's still with us, but I hope she is. And she said that she had lost someone very close to her, very young, her mother, and how she understood it. And she gave me enormous strength and courage and wisdom. But then over the next few months, I remember talking to people again. I didn't really know how to process it. And I found it very uncomfortable when people said, "And what about your dad? What's your father do?" Or, you know, those kind of questions. I didn't know how to answer the question. But when I did, sometimes I felt this rather odd feeling of sort of, I don't know how to describe it quite, but sort of specialness. And I felt very guilty about that. I thought, oh, this is something unusual. This is something that makes me a bit different, which I desperately wanted to be, you know, to stand out. And so I had this feeling that, yeah, that it gave me something different to other people, or would make me memorable. That's being very honest, you know. But then that also, as I say, that also troubled me, the fact that I perceived it in that way, you know. But I'm aware now of, I've looked at these things quite a lot in my life, and I'm aware now of how we process things, how we are unable to process things, the way the mind works, and the way that one finds, you know, to deal with things, you know. Sometimes it's not what you might read in a book as the appropriate way, but in actual fact, there isn't a right way of processing death.
I was just thinking about that, you know, when you were talking about kind of is what I'm feeling or experiencing right, or is it wrong?
Yeah.
And at times it sounds like it felt like both for you.
Yes. Exactly.
And where do we get that information from? Where do we get the answers to those questions from? Who's talking about it around us, and what are they telling us?
Yeah, exactly. And I think also children are very smart, you know, really on a deep level. They're instinctive, and a lot of times that's knocked out of us, isn't it? As we grow older. But I reckon that I felt something wasn't quite straight about the circumstances surrounding his death, you know, that I hadn't been told everything, or that there was a feeling of more to come. It didn't satisfy something in me. So I didn't feel I could reconcile it quite, if one ever can, you know.
And it was so sudden, and as you say, came out of the blue, and how can anyone be prepared for that? I was thinking also, Tara, about through grief, creating meaning for ourselves from the death and the loss, and how, I guess, I'm guessing you did that from the age of 11 to 19.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at 19, the story changed.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a bit more about that when you were 19?
Yeah, so I suppose consciously in some ways and unconsciously in others, that one builds, as you say, this story and a narrative, and it becomes a sort of anchor. I really feel that, you know, in order to be free in life, certainly for me, I need to have some solids, or in order to relinquish control, because I, like the best of them, tend to be quite controlling. But in order to try and let go of those things, let go of that, I'm trying to run the show. I need a few strong anchors. And those are the sort of, let's say, the key events that have happened in one's life. And those are mostly defining, I would say defining moments. And so I had built my narrative based on the fact that my father had been killed in a car crash. And that was that felt very random. I reconciled it by saying, those are the things that happen in life. That was really, really tragic. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, To then learn he had killed himself meant that obviously I had to break apart that narrative, break apart to some degree my own sense of self, because that goes into a very different territory, which is around mental illness. And it became about how then to understand my father in a new way, towards what had driven him to take his own life, and then on from that, what has that handed on to me? What have I inherited, from him? Do I, in my clumsy way, let's say, do I have that in my gene then? Am I someone who might also suffer from some sort of ideation, or have a depressive tendency, or, any of these mental conditions that I understand would have led to him committing suicide? I mean, even the thing committing suicide sounds, the language around it is quite hard, isn't it? It's quite formal, I think, and difficult. And I read a brilliant book by Alvarez, which was very helpful to me. I then went towards reading, and I guess because I'm an actor and I tend towards romantic understandings, and that's been very helpful for me, in my work, but also in ways of dealing with things. I've found a lot of solace in literature and art, and I've found help in appropriating difficult subjects in those ways. So I went towards a lot of reading, the romantic poets, people who had suffered, as I could see it, suffered with something similar to my father, whilst at the same time trying not to overly romanticize him, trying to see him for who he was. I think that's something probably that's only happened later in my life, that I couldn't not have him as a romantic figure because I found it too painful. Which in a way wasn't fair to him. You have to take people on a human level. You have to appreciate them on a human level. And I think then they can transcend. But I found it very difficult to see him for who he was. I felt so many different things. And I'm sure you'll know this, that things don't happen in linear ways in life. As you said earlier, you can feel both things or many things at the same time. And it depends where you are in a day, how you land on them, and things can be triggers and surprise you. But I suppose that I've only recently learnt how to really see him as a man, see him as a father who struggled, who found things, found living quite difficult, obviously, and didn't know how to continue then with any sort of judgment. I'm not sure if I ever really judged. I felt angry at certain points, angry for the loss and for his not being able to make it, and angry at my not knowing him, my loss of opportunity to know him. But I don't know. I mean, is that judgmental? I don't know if I consider that judgmental. I feel I've always been quite compassionate around his death. I feel I've always been quite understanding around him needing to go.
Mm. You talked at the beginning about how death changes as time goes on and as we get older. And what I took from that was you were talking about as you evolve, then the experience of it evolves with that.
Yes.
And you've started to talk a bit about how in recent years it's changed again for you as how you see your dad as a man. And so I just wanted to ask if you could tell me firstly your dad's name and then maybe a bit about him and what kind of man was he?
Yeah. His name was Michael, and he was a real free spirit and had a rocking sense of humor. He was very mischievous, I would say. He was very beautiful. He was very handsome. He was very good at things, and just naturally good at things. He was very sensitive, could connect with people, could make people laugh quite easily, it seemed. He also had this huge reservoir. I mean, the thing he's given me, if we talk about legacy, is a hug. And honestly, I've never felt a hug like that was so completely embracing and filled with warmth and laughter and seemed to express his whole character. In some ways, I think I've been searching for that hug, since, which is a bit of a grail, isn't it? He was very good at languages, and I'm hopeless. I'm trying to. He was an adventurer. He was very brave. He had a real wanderlust. So he went off and traveled, and he tried new things, and he wasn't bound by money. He went out and he traveled, South America. He went into the hills and he met, tribes, and he tried to cross boundaries, if you like. And he was a very good teacher. He was very good with young people. He understood young people, and he was an artist. I have a couple of very small things of his, and he was talented. And I know he wanted that more than anything, and was frustrated because he couldn't quite get to do it in the way that I feel he needed to. Obviously, I'm aware too that some of these things are my projection, but these are also things that I felt as a child. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these are authentic.
I loved how when you were describing the hug, that you got, it just making me think about sort of that loss and legacy can be so physical as well as emotional.
Yes.
Which is amazing, really, isn't it?
Yes, it's like an imprint that you wouldn't. Well, it's good for me not to be too academic about things, Jason. It's good for me to not always stay in my mind. And so, yes, the imprint of something like that is really, it's transformative. It's really transformative. If I can, if I can pass on one hug with 1/10 of what he had in his, then that'll be something.
Some of life's questions are harder than others. If you or a loved one are facing end of life or bereavement, Marie Curie is here to listen and help. Call our free support line on 0800 090 2309 or start a web chat by visiting mariecurie.org.uk/support.
I'd like to talk a bit more about your experience of bereavement and grief in the sense of what what we do know is lots of people who listen to this podcast find the podcast in itself something helpful for them if they're grieving or bereaved. Also, I think some of the things that have helped the guest on the podcast as well with their experience. So you've talked about reading books, poetry. Is there anything else that helped you and has helped and continues to with your experience of bereavement and grief?
Yeah, so art in general, definitely. I think, yes, reading, but then I think also connecting with works of art, visual, because I think things that are expressed in paint, for instance, can describe something to you that perhaps it's too complicated to measure, too complicated to articulate, but can provide some understanding or illumination. Or certainly I found that for me. The nature, of course, if one is able to get out and just breathe outside and inhale good air, good air whilst you are feeling moved or upset or troubled or overly excited, agitated, or, again, I think I'm using these labels, and more and more, I'm trying not to give myself too many labels. I know that I'm very self-critical, for instance, and that I can quickly say, oh, you're being too much of something, Tara. You're too much for people. You're being too loud, or you're being too excitable, and actually breathing can help with that. Taking a walk, as I said. So sometimes if I've been too much, I might take myself out for a walk around the block even. That can help. But also within that, trying or moving away from saying I'm too much, and going, this is something speaking to me, and this is something I need to work with, rather than tamp down or criticize. This is telling me something. It doesn't have to be venerated, but it has to be at least heard or honored or say respected. So I think the internal dialogue is really important. How we speak to ourselves is really key towards self-compassion, obviously, and towards process of loss, which may take, you may think, I think I have thought with people I've lost, I figured that one out, or I've put that one to bed, or whatever language I might use. And actually, bam, I see something, or I meet somebody from the past, and it all comes flooding back again. So to allow that to happen, not be hard on oneself, about right ways and wrong ways of doing things. And language is so important in that. And words are so important, the value of words,
Absolutely. I think self-compassion is so difficult when you're grieving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even back to what we were saying earlier about that kind of right and wrong and which way to do it, and kind of I'm not getting it right and I'm doing it wrong.
That's it.
And how do we talk to ourselves in the right way and care for ourselves and look after ourselves? And as you describe, that inner dialogue.
Yeah. And also tied in with that is the should have and could have done more. That's all part of it, I think. The why, with my father, why wasn't I enough? Was one question, has been a question. Why wasn't I enough to keep him here? With other losses I've experienced in my life, what could I have done? What should I have done? If I had done this, would they still be here? I did that wrong. They might have had another 2 years, 3 years, if I'd understood something differently. If I'd been a better person, I guess it comes down to, if I'd been a better person, they would have been here for longer, in very finite terms, very simple terms. But I know that's not true. It's also that, trying to tread the line of, it's not about me, it's not about me, whilst also going, it is about me at the same time, and how I can help and how I can process and how I can take on whatever I'm trying to take on and live my life, you know, being sensitive to the idea that, you know, the person dying or who has died has undergone something sometimes incredibly difficult to deal with. You know, being sensitive to that, and also being sensitive to oneself, as you say, being compassionate to oneself, and letting oneself be in the picture too. You know.
I was just thinking there about that, you know, some of those questions of what could I have done differently can be just so painful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aren't they? You know?
Like really sort of the deepest questions, you know, that one can ask of oneself. And the most, what's the word I want? The most unfulfilling in a way, because there isn't an answer, really. That's not going anywhere. You know, we could all have done something differently, but actually, would it really have changed anything? You know, for me, I have to say, the only sort of succor, if you like, I can find is saying it wouldn't have made a difference. You know, this was the time. This was the time. And like it or not, you may have shifted 1 degree here or there, but accept that this was that person's time to go. And acceptance is the only way, really.
And I'm just thinking about anybody or everybody who's listening now, and I just, I kind of, almost want to say rewind that bit, you know, for a minute, because it's such a strong, important, key message, and I think it's a good one to replay, isn't it, for yourself, you know?
Yeah.
One of the other aims of this podcast, Tara, is that we want people to talk more about death and dying and bereavement and loss. I say we, it's charity, Marie Curie, because we know that when people do have open conversations about it, they will often have better outcomes afterwards. So one of the things we talk about to people is planning for the future, and some of those practical things you can do, like writing a will or expressing your funeral wishes, letting people know what you want. And I wanted to ask, firstly, whether you think about your own death, and if so, have you considered some of those practical things?
Yeah, I mean, to say that absolutely what you've also mentioned is talking to people, and that is another thing that has helped enormously, you know, sharing with other people, because I do notice, and I'm sure you have too, I'm sure it's been a common experience, that, you know, people can only take, it seems, so much talk about death, you know, before people say things like, oh, this is a bit heavy, or, oh, I don't think we want to be here for too long, or something along those lines, or how did we get into this conversation, or, you know, and when you're trying to talk straight about something like death, and you get a response like that, it makes you feel really shamed, you know, or it's made me feel shameful. Let's say I felt ashamed of myself, and I think again, talking to people who are sympathetic, who perhaps have a common experience, even if it's not the same, or even just an understanding, an insight, is absolutely key to health and to help, and to making one feel that one isn't alone. You know, you're not alone is so important to know that. So I do think about death sometimes because it's part of my work. You know, it's a fun way, weirdly. It's a safe, it can be fun. You know, it can be fun to explore a subject like death in a safe environment in my work, you know. it can feel safer and more fun than in real life. So I'm very lucky for that. So I can consider things within a boundaried way that I might not dare to do in real life. I'm very lucky. But also that enables me, I hope, to get a better grip on it and a more common human understanding so that I can relay that message in what I do. I hope that's what I do. So then I also do think about, because I'm in my mid-50s now. So I think, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but perhaps, there's a sense of going over the 50s something, and then you're like, I've reached the top of the hill and now I'm going down the hill or something, like, I don't know, it sounds a bit silly, but so I'm evolving. And now I'm sort of declining and I'm heading towards death is the way I think I picture it. And so I better prepare. And though that doesn't, because death can strike at any moment, it can be a totally random occurrence. So it doesn't really, it's not logical, should we say. But somehow I have that. So yes, the preparation or my perception of death is changing. And I'm aware too that people around me, my contemporaries and older, are passing with more frequency, and that's something that would have been, say, very uncommon in my teens and was when my father died, and obviously in, my 20s. But now I recognize that it's going to become more common, and it's something that I have to get accustomed to. That is the way it is. It's natural, that's nature, So there's that recognition, but also practically, yes, things like will and legacy in a tangible sense, tangible assets. One has to consider that. I don't want to leave a whole load of stuff for people to have to wade through. That, for instance, is one thing that I would say, that I'm aware I accrue a lot of stuff. And I'm aware that when people in my family have died, often they have had a lot of things. And that's given a job to somebody that maybe is difficult. It can be healing too. It can be healing going through things. And can make one feel like, a detective in the life of the person who has passed, and you can reach understanding through discovery, through objects or through things, but also not leaving too much paperwork, I'd say. It's hard. People lose someone and then they have to deal with all that paperwork.
Yeah.
It's a big job.
And now a big digital footprint as well.
Oh, huge digital footprint. Yes. And sometimes that's beneficial, can be beneficial, as I was saying. But sometimes it's really onerous. It can help people process death quietly, but sometimes it's just onerous and then cuts into someone's life in a way that perhaps isn't helpful. So I'm trying to be mindful of that, to make things as simple as possible for the people I love. I'm not achieving it, currently, but that's what I'm aiming for.
Sticking with that, you've talked about legacy, and I'd like to ask, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I suppose I'd like to be remembered as someone who loved, fully the people they loved, but also encouraged creativity, encouraged people to really explore their heart. I really do believe in that. I think one of the saddest things I've heard or can hear is when people say, I never looked at that part of myself. I always wanted to do this and I didn't do it. And that's my sadness, I find that quite heartbreaking. I really do believe that it's worth trying and messing up, but giving things a go, beginning things. I'm a great procrastinator. I mean, I really am. But I also, in opposition to that, I also really believe in trying things out, following your heart, trusting your instinct. Those things. I hope my work does something. It's what I do is in moving image. So I'm aware it doesn't have the same, or I'm conscious of the fact that it doesn't have the same possibilities as other forms of art. And I don't want to give myself anything grandiose. I'm not being grandiose in it, but I hope there've been some moments. There might be some moments that would continue, that might illuminate something for somebody, or help, or entertain, or move, or whatever it might do. That there might be, or on stage. Stage has more possibility of that there's a snapshot that might make someone's life a little easier, or illustrate something in someone's life.
Like paintings.
Like paintings, yeah. Like paintings, I hope. So those things.
Mm-hmm. Just two more questions just before we finish, Tara. One is, like I've said, we know that people, will either be caring for somebody with a terminal illness who are listening to this podcast, or will have experienced bereavement themselves. Is there anything you would say, or any words you would share to somebody listening that might offer some comfort and support?
Yeah, I really think it's important not to feel there's a perfect way of doing anything. That the person who you are helping, or the person that you have helped, will have benefited so hugely from that connection, from that time, from your just being there. And those things are immeasurable. Those things are transcendent. Those are the, to make a cup of tea for somebody, those simple things in the way they like. They may not like it the way you do it, but those simple things will just go in and change people in a way that perhaps can't be seen or measured. And to take hold of that and trust that and feel good about it. There's so much that doesn't feel that good, that, seize those little moments and really, really believe in them.
Last question. What's it meant to you today, Tara, to be on the Marie Curie couch and have this conversation?
Well, I'm very, I really feel honoured to be asked. And for me, it's quite hard sometimes. How truthful can I be? I think I find that quite difficult. How truthful dare I be? But it's meant a lot. I hope more than anything, my words have been beneficial. I hope more than anything that something I've said resonates somewhere. So thank you for having me.
Well, Tara Fitzgerald, thank you for joining me on the Marie Curie couch today. Thanks for sharing some of Michael, your father's story, and your experiences. Thanks for being very open and honest, and it's a real pleasure to meet you.
A pleasure for me too. Thank you.
So that's all for this episode of On the Marie Curie Couch. We hope it's got you thinking about matters of life and death, and perhaps starting those conversations with your own friends and family. Marie Curie's here to help. From planning ahead to coping with bereavement, you can talk through any concerns you have around the end of life with our support line team, which also includes specially trained nurses. Call us on 0800 080 2309 or search Marie Curie online. The podcast is produced and edited by Marie Curie with support from Ultimate Sound and Vision, and the music featured is Time Lapse by Pan Oceanic. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do like and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.